Welcome to Midnight Whispers today. We're venturing deep into the heart of 10 disturbing true night shift horror stories where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights flickering in empty hospital corridors to shadowy figures moving through abandoned warehouses, get ready for some of the most disturbing true horror. Stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. The night has a way of twisting ordinary spaces into something unfamiliar. Hallways that seemed mundane by day stretch endlessly in the dark. Machines hum with voices you can't quite identify. Footsteps echo where no one walks. And those who work while the world sleeps sometimes catch glimpses of things that vanish the moment anyone else appears. These stories are not fiction. They are the memories of people who lived through hours that should have been safe, ordinary and quiet, yet became tests of endurance, sanity, and courage. Tonight, you will hear about security guards, nurses, janitors, and drivers who faced the unknown alone in the dead hours. The tension is subtle at first, a whisper, a shadow, a door creaking, but it grows until there is no turning back. Prepare yourself as we step into the unseen side of the night, where every sound could be a warning and every silence a threat. If a place or a voice like this has ever followed you home, tell us below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. If these investigations mean something to you, please subscribe. It's just one click, but it keeps the lights on while we keep listening in the dark. Story 1. The security guard who wasn't alone. It was a freezing December night in 2012 around 2:15 a.m. at the office complex in downtown Cleveland where I worked as a security guard. The wind was howling outside, rattling the glass windows, and the empty parking lot shimmered with patches of ice reflecting the pale light of the street lamps. My rounds had been routine all evening, checking doors, patrolling the corridors, making sure the alarm system was functioning. But as I walked past the 11th floor offices, I noticed something strange. The faint sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and too soft to be my own echo. I paused, heart thudding, and called out, "Hello? Who's there?" There was no response. I convinced myself it was my imagination, the sound of my boots on the tile bouncing back oddly. But as I continued down the hallway, the steps resumed, perfectly timed with my own. I quickened my pace, but the echo followed, now accompanied by a faint whisper, almost inaudible, like someone muttering words I couldn't understand. By 3 a.m., the tension was unbearable. The office lights flickered intermittently, and the usual hum of the ventilation system sounded distorted, like it was mimicking something unnatural. I tried calling the security office on my radio, but the channel was dead, replaced by static punctuated with low, almost human-like groans. Every door I checked was locked, yet I could hear the faint creak of someone or something pacing in rooms I had just cleared. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it, a prank, a break-in, or sheer exhaustion. But then I caught a movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across the hallway faster than a human could move. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and saw nothing. Still, the whispering grew louder, like 1,000 tiny voices overlapping, urging me toward the emergency stairwell. When dawn finally arrived around 6:30 a.m., I had left the building shaking and pale, refusing to look back. My colleagues found the security logs and video footage from the night. Every camera showed the empty hallway, the offices, the stairwells, but on one feed from the 11th floor, there was a brief, almost imperceptible shadow, standing still, watching the camera, only to vanish when the next frame loaded. I never returned to that building for another night shift, and to this day I swear that if I had stayed, it would have followed me, patient, silent, and waiting. Every time I walk through empty corridors or hear footsteps behind me in silence, I remember that night, and the unsettling certainty that sometimes, when the world sleeps, you are not alone. Story 2. Hospital hallways after midnight. It was a bitterly cold night in January 2015, around 1:45 a.m., in a small hospital in Des Moines, Iowa, where I worked as a night shift nurse. The wind outside howled through the skeletal trees surrounding the building, rattling the windows and setting the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. Most of the patients were asleep, and the halls were eerily quiet, except for the occasional beep from a monitor or the distant hum of the boiler. I was making my routine rounds, checking vitals and medications, when I noticed movement at the far end of a long hallway. At first, I thought it was another nurse or a doctor returning from their break, but the figure stood unnaturally still, shadowed in the dim emergency lights. I called softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" And the figure didn't respond. My stomach tightened, an uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I walked closer, but it vanished before I could reach it, leaving only the faint echo of soft footsteps in the silence behind me. By 2:30 a.m., the feeling of being watched had intensified. Every shadow seemed to stretch farther than it should, and I kept catching glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. Faint, fleeting, impossible to focus on. I checked patient rooms and supply closets, convinced it was someone hiding, maybe a prank, but found nothing. Then the intercom buzzed unexpectedly, a low, distorted voice whispering my name. My hands shook as I pressed the button to report it, only to hear static in response. The hospital's security cameras later showed empty hallways, yet I could swear that whatever had been there had been following me, always just outside the camera's view, silent until I wasn't looking. My coworkers tried to dismiss it, attributing my experience to fatigue or the storm outside, but I knew the sensation of being pursued in silence was real. By 5:50 a.m., as dawn slowly crept through the blinds, I made my way to the nurse's station, heart still racing. The shadow never appeared again, and the halls seemed ordinary, almost welcoming in the morning light. But I've never forgotten the oppressive sense of presence in those empty corridors, the feeling that something unseen had been moving just beyond my reach, studying me, patient and silent. Years later, I avoid night shifts whenever I can, and even in ordinary buildings at night, I find myself glancing down empty hallways, imagining that same motion, the same weight pressing in the air. The memory lingers like a whisper. Some places, some hours are never truly empty, and the world can feel far more dangerous when you are alone and no one else is watching. Story 3. The factory's whispering machines. It was 11:17 p.m. on a damp October evening in 2016 when I arrived at the textile factory in Akron, Ohio for my overnight shift. The rain had been pouring steadily for hours, hammering against the corrugated metal roof, and the parking lot puddles reflected the orange glow of the streetlights. As soon as I stepped inside, the usual hum of the machinery felt different. Normally, the looms and conveyors provided a rhythmic comfort, but that night they seemed to breathe, their motors pulsing irregularly, almost like they were alive. I greeted the night supervisor, who was unusually quiet, and started my rounds. As I walked between the machines, I began to hear faint whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to echo off the walls. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe the acoustics of the empty factory, but then I clearly heard my name, whispered from the direction of one of the looms. I froze, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. No one was there. By 1:03 a.m., the tension was unbearable. The machines would start and stop on their own, levers moving without reason, belts shifting while I was still several feet away. I tried to call the supervisor, but his radio was dead. Even the emergency intercom crackled faintly, as if someone, or something, was breathing into it. I could feel it watching, something patient and invisible, waiting just beyond the dim glow of the overhead lamps. At one point, a shadow moved across the far wall, following me perfectly as I backed away toward the break room. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for the light switch, only for the power to flicker and die for a moment, plunging the room into darkness. When the lights returned, everything appeared normal again, but the whispering persisted, faint and constant, like a reminder that I was not alone. By the time my shift ended at 6:15 a.m., the storm had cleared, leaving the factory eerily silent and the machinery cold and still. The supervisor told me everything was fine on the cameras, machines working normally, no one else inside. But I knew what I had felt. That night, I left the factory with a growing dread in my chest, convinced that the shadows and the whispers would be waiting for the next night shift. Even now, years later, I can hear it sometimes. The low, almost mechanical murmur of voices when I'm alone, and I swear it's calling my name. Some nights, when the wind blows just right past my apartment window, I can still feel it in the back of my mind. Patient, watching, whispering. Story 4. The taxi that took me somewhere else. It was 12:47 a.m. on a rainy April night in 2018 in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, when I got into a taxi after a late shift at the diner. The streets were nearly empty, the occasional neon sign flickering in puddles, and the rain pattered steadily against the windshield. I gave the driver my usual address, but as soon as we pulled onto the freeway, the city started to feel wrong. Familiar landmarks twisted into strange shapes. Streetlights stretched farther than they should, and every exit we passed seemed like a distorted reflection of somewhere I knew but didn't recognize. I glanced at the driver, an older man with a blank expression, and asked, "Are you sure this is the right way?" He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. A shiver crawled up my spine as the GPS, which had been guiding me perfectly all week, displayed a route that didn't exist. By 1:30 a.m., the unease had turned into outright terror. The streets we traveled were deserted, yet I could see faint shadows darting along the sidewalks, moving in ways that felt unnatural. I tried opening the door to get out, but it was locked. The driver hummed a tune I didn't recognize, low and monotonous, almost like a chant. I asked again where we were going, and this time he muttered something I couldn't understand, his voice rough, like gravel scraping. My phone had no signal, and the radio only emitted static. Then I noticed the reflections in the rearview mirror. There were faces there, fleeting, pale and silent, appearing behind me for just a second before vanishing. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. By the time we pulled back into what seemed like familiar streets at 2:17 a.m., I stumbled out, drenched, shaking, and gasping for air. The city looked normal again, but something in me had changed. I kept looking over my shoulder for weeks, convinced that if I ever took a cab at night again, it might find that twisted route and take me back. Even now, when I hear tires splashing through puddles on a dark road, or catch the reflection of a rearview mirror, my stomach tightens, and I remember the way that night seemed to exist outside reality, a place where normal rules didn't apply, and I have no idea who or what was driving me. Story 5. The warehouse that shouldn't be empty. It was 11:52 p.m. on a cold November night in 2017, in an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, where I worked as a night security guard. The wind whipped through the cracked windows, carrying the smell of oil and wet asphalt. The building was supposed to be empty, machines dismantled, shipments done, but as I walked through the echoing aisles, I could hear faint metallic clicks and the soft scrape of something moving across the concrete floor. At first I told myself it was my imagination or the building settling, but the sound repeated in a rhythm that mimicked my own footsteps. My flashlight swept over empty shelves and crates, nothing visible, yet I felt a presence trailing just beyond the beam. Patient, silent. I muttered to myself, "It's just me. Just me." But my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the shadows. By 1:07 a.m., the tension had become unbearable. Doors that were locked when I checked them earlier now creaked open on their own. I could hear the faintest whispers echoing from the far corners, indistinct syllables that seemed to form words when I concentrated, always just out of comprehension. My radio crackled with static, briefly forming what sounded like my name. I froze, scanning the aisles. A shadow flickered between stacks of crates, moving too fast and too fluidly to be human. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a reflection, but the unease crawling over my skin told me otherwise. I started walking faster, but every turn seemed to lead me deeper into the warehouse, to areas I didn't recognize, as though the building itself had changed while I wasn't looking. By the time the morning sun began to seep through the grimy windows at 6:18 a.m., the building appeared normal again, silent, empty, and ordinary. The security cameras, when reviewed, showed only empty aisles and shelves, no sign of anyone else. Yet I knew what I had felt. Something had been in that warehouse, moving in the shadows, whispering just out of reach. I never returned for another night shift, and to this day, I cannot pass an abandoned warehouse or hear the scrape of metal on concrete without feeling that same chill. That patient presence waiting in the darkness, watching, following, and perhaps still wandering unseen. Story 6. The motel room that never ended. It was 2:13 a.m. on a foggy September night in 2019 when I checked into a small, rundown motel in Flagstaff, Arizona, after a 12-hour night shift at a nearby warehouse. The neon sign outside flickered weakly, painting the wet asphalt in shades of red and green. The clerk was absent behind the counter, and the lobby smelled of mildew and cheap air freshener. I had a key handed to me by a hand that vanished as soon as I turned to the hallway. The carpet was worn, the walls yellowed, and as I opened my door, a sudden draft made it rattle on its hinges. I placed my bag down and noticed the room layout felt off, slightly different from the photos online. The bathroom door was narrower, the window higher than it should be. I muttered, "Must be tired," shaking my head, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at my stomach. By 3 a.m., I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air felt thick, heavy, and each shadow seemed to stretch farther than it should. I heard a soft scratching sound like fingernails on wood coming from the bathroom. My hand trembled as I flicked on the light, but nothing was there. The mirror reflected the room accurately, except for a faint movement behind me in the corner of the frame, disappearing the instant I turned my head. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone line was dead. My phone had no signal, the Wi-Fi non-existent. The window rattled again, though the wind outside had quieted, and I could swear I heard faint, whispering voices repeating my name in an almost familiar tone. My pulse raced, and I realized the room seemed to stretch infinitely. No matter which door I tried, the hallway felt longer, darker, and I couldn't find the exit. By 5:27 a.m., exhaustion forced me to sit on the edge of the bed, trembling. When the sun finally peeked over the horizon, the room appeared normal again. Everything in its correct place, doors where they should be. But I know what I experienced. The endless corridor of shadows, the whispered voice, the room that seemed to twist itself around me. I left quickly, not looking back, but ever since that night, even ordinary motel rooms make my skin crawl. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake imagining those walls extending endlessly, hearing the soft whisper of my name in the dark. And the worst part? I can't tell if it was real, or if the motel simply found a way to follow me home. Story 7. The gas station that wasn't there. It was 11:59 p.m. on a bitter January night in 2020 when I pulled into a small gas station on Route 66 near Winslow, Arizona, for my usual night shift snack break. The wind was sharp, and the horizon glowed with the reflection of distant city lights. The station was older than I remembered from previous drives, and the pumps had peeling paint, as if they hadn't been used in decades. The attendant was a middle-aged man with a flat expression, standing behind the counter like a statue. When I asked him if the restroom was open, he didn't answer immediately, just stared. Then, in a low monotone, he said, "It's safer outside." The words made my stomach twist, but I laughed nervously, assuming he was joking. I stepped outside to stretch, and immediately noticed the road looked wrong. No familiar signs, no intersections I knew, only the station looming under a flickering neon light. By 1:04 a.m., I was convinced something was off. Every time I tried to leave, the exit seemed to lead back toward the station. I checked my car GPS. The map flickered, showing me trapped in a looping circle. I tried to call anyone, but my phone had no signal. The lights inside the station flickered, and I could hear whispers in the cold wind, almost like a conversation I couldn't fully understand. I turned to ask the attendant for help, but the counter was empty, and the faint jingling of the door made me whip around, yet no one was there. Panic set in, my hands shaking as I realized the pumps were slowly moving closer to my car, almost imperceptibly, like they were alive. I backed away, trying the ignition, but the engine refused to start, leaving me stranded in the empty lot with the wind moaning through the deserted road. By the time the sun began to rise at 6:19 a.m., the station had vanished. The road looked normal again, perfectly straight, familiar signs in place. My car started immediately, but the memory of that night has haunted me ever since. I still drive that route cautiously, always scanning the horizon for the flickering neon or the peeling pumps. Sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I hear whispers on the wind repeating the attendant's words. It's safer outside. And the terrifying part is, I still don't know what outside meant, or if I'd ever really left the gas station at all. Story 8. The silent hospital wing. It was 2:47 a.m. on a rainy October night in 2018 when I was assigned to the old wing of St. Mary's Hospital in Buffalo, New York. The corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with mildew, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast shadows that danced along the peeling wallpaper. The wing had been mostly abandoned for years, but occasionally patients were moved there during renovations. I was alone on this floor, the night nurse having left me to complete rounds and security checks. As I walked past the empty rooms, I heard soft knocks coming from one of the farthest rooms. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing against the tiled walls. No answer. The knocks continued, deliberate, almost impatient, but when I opened the door, the room was empty. Bed neatly made, monitors off, Everything as sterile as it should be. I told myself it was the pipes or a branch hitting the window, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. By 4:12 a.m., I was on edge. The knocks had stopped, replaced by faint whispers, almost like someone repeating my name, but distorted, breathless. I tried to check my walkie-talkie, but all I got was static, broken occasionally by a faint, hollow laugh. I moved down the hall, flashlight in hand, and noticed that the floor seemed subtly different than I remembered. Tiles slightly shifted, shadows thicker, corners darker. The doors to other rooms, which should have been locked, were open, and I could hear the faint shuffle of shoes, soft and deliberate, moving just out of sight. I called out again, "Is anyone here?" But only silence answered. Yet the temperature had dropped, cyan sharp against my skin. By 6:03 a.m., the first rays of sunlight began filtering through the high windows, but the wing felt unchanged, as if the night hadn't ended. I left the floor as quickly as I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, watched by invisible eyes in the corners of the hallway. Weeks later, when reviewing security footage, the cameras showed only an empty hallway. No doors opening, no shadows, no movement. But I remember exactly what I felt: the whispers, the shifting shadows, and the overwhelming certainty that someone or something was present, just out of reach. And sometimes when I drive past hospitals at night, I swear I can hear that same hollow laugh echoing faintly in my ears, reminding me that some places never truly stay empty. Story 9. The delivery truck that vanished. It was 11:38 p.m. on a bitterly cold November night in 2017, when I was driving my delivery truck through rural Kansas, en route to a warehouse drop-off in a tiny town called Norton. Snow had started to fall, lightly, and the road was slick, making each mile tense. I radioed into dispatch to confirm my next stop, but the line crackled with static and an indistinct voice repeating, almost in mockery, "Are you there?" I shrugged it off, thinking it was interference from the storm, and continued down the long, dark highway. That's when I saw it. A lone figure standing at the edge of the road, barely visible under the dim glow of a broken streetlight. I slowed the truck and rolled down my window, asking, "Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond, just stared. And then, in the next instant, it was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving only the snow swirling around my tires. By 1:05 a.m., unease had turned into full-blown panic. The GPS, which had always been reliable, began redirecting me in loops, showing roads that didn't exist, dead ends where only open fields should have been. I checked my mirrors constantly, convinced I saw headlights tailing me, but every time I turned, the road behind was empty. The radio flickered on with fragments of static conversations, faint screaming, and once, a chilling whisper of my own name. My hands shook, gripping the steering wheel as the temperature in the cab dropped inexplicably, frost forming on the windshield despite the heater blasting. I pulled off to a gas station that hadn't been there the last time I drove this route. But inside, it was deserted, like a set frozen in time, the shelves dusty, lights dim. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized I might not be alone. By 3:47 a.m., dawn was approaching, and the roads finally seemed normal again, snow-covered but recognizable. My truck was intact, and the GPS worked properly, but the memory of the figure, the loops, and the voices lingered. I've avoided that route ever since, taking detours that add hours to my shifts, yet sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I swear I see a shadow standing at the roadside, vanishing the moment I blink. I don't know if it was a hallucination, brought on by exhaustion and storm-induced stress, or something far more sinister. And the most terrifying part? The voice on the radio wasn't mine, but it knew my name. Story 10. The night janitor who watched. It was 12:03 a.m. on a foggy March night in 2019 when I arrived for my night shift as a security guard at the Crestwood office complex in Portland, Oregon. The rain had been steady all evening, drumming against the roof in a rhythm that made the empty hallways feel alive, almost breathing. I did my usual check-in, key fob in hand, and began the rounds, making mental notes of lights left on, doors ajar, and the hum of the HVAC system echoing through the deserted offices. About an hour in, I noticed something off near the maintenance area. The janitor's closet door, which was always locked during the night, was slightly open. Frowning, I approached, thinking maybe the night janitor had returned early. "Hello?" I called softly, expecting a response from some distant voice, but nothing, just silence, thick and suffocating. By 1:37 a.m., the unease had settled into a gnawing dread. Every time I passed the janitor's closet, I could swear I saw movement, shadows shifting just out of the corner of my eye. My radio crackled with faint, unintelligible whispers, barely audible over the steady drip of water from a leaking pipe in the corridor. I checked the security cameras from the control room, and that's when my stomach dropped. On every feed, the janitor's closet was empty, but the camera angles subtly changed, showing perspectives that shouldn't exist. The hallway stretched unnaturally in the monitors, and the lights seemed dimmer than reality. I started to hear soft footsteps behind me when no one was there, and once a low, raspy voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here," just as I turned a corner to check the supply room. The door slammed shut on its own. My heart raced, but I forced myself to continue, thinking it was exhaustion, stress, or the old building settling. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. By 4:12 a.m., I was convinced the building had its own consciousness, aware of my presence, watching me like prey. When morning finally broke, the janitor's closet was locked as always. The hallway returned to normal and the building was silent again, as if the night had been a dream. Yet I know it wasn't. Even now I can't shake the image of the shadowy figure I felt standing just inside the closet, watching me, waiting. Sometimes when I walk past old office buildings at night, I swear I hear that same raspy warning whisper, and a chill runs down my spine. I never saw the janitor or anything again, but I've never worked a night shift since without feeling those unseen eyes tracking my every step. The memory lingers, and I can't help but wonder if the building is still waiting for the next person foolish enough to be alone in it after dark. If any of these stories made the hairs on your neck stand up, remember, you're not alone. Night shifts aren't just about long hours and empty hallways. Sometimes they reveal things we weren't meant to see. Shadows move when no one's there. Whispers echo in silent corridors, and the feeling of being watched can follow you home. If you've ever experienced something strange or unexplainable during a night shift, or even just felt that creeping sense of dread in an empty building, we want to hear from you. Sharing your story could help someone else feel less isolated, less vulnerable in the darkness. Every like, share, and comment helps us continue bringing these chilling, true experiences to life. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation into the unknown. Our work thrives on your curiosity, your stories, and your courage to confront what lurks in the shadows. One click keeps the lights on while we keep listening in the dark, uncovering tales that make you question what's real and what's just waiting for you in the night. So, if a shadow has ever followed you, a whisper ever called your name, or a night shift ever left you sleepless with fear, comment below and let your experience be heard.